Okay, share. All right, I just want to make sure that people on Zoom can see the contract client or the contract itself, the lease listing. Can anyone see it?
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
Yes,
beautiful. Thank you. All right, so welcome everyone. Any big plans for the weekend? It's going to be a beautiful day this weekend. At least we have no rain. All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. It is 10:30, so I wanted to dive deep into the lease listing agreement. Make sure that you have the most current revision, which is the December 2024. Okay. I've been getting a lot of a lot of agents asking a lot of questions regarding this specific form. It has been completely revamped, and there's a lot of lingo and language in here that agents are a little confused. So I went ahead already and kind of filled it out just to kind of give you as an example. This session is also going to be recorded. So if you want to go back, just go to our KW Shares YouTube channel and you'll be able to see this. Now, one of the biggest things that I enjoy and love is all of this stuff. You can also go to YouTube, type in lease listings revised 2024, and there's a lot of instructors teaching the curriculum and breaking it down as well. So I would encourage all of you, to really understand how the elements and how to navigate these specific forms, the resources. You can always also reach out to the office, to the broker as well, and ask the broker for some guidance and advice as well. Okay. All right. So most of the stuff is pretty self-explanatory. Okay. And we'll go into the breakdown, the understanding, the landlord and the tenant. Okay. And how it all kind of structures and ultimately how you lease a property. All right, so it starts off as most of your forms is your date of preparation. This is the date that you actually create the form. The next is you're having an exclusive right to a lease, right? So this is where the landlords will be executing this agreement. So you're going to put either the name of the person, or if they have a corporation or a trust or an LLC, however they want to structure this, then you're going to put that as part of the process. Now, if they are putting it through a corporation, a trust, we're going to need to do a representative capacity form, and you also want to make sure that they're the ones that have the rights to execute this particular lease. Does that make sense? All right. The next is um, the employment and who grants this, right? This is where you're going to put yourself as the agent, right? The lease listing agent. So that would be Keller Williams. Okay. The beginning date and the expiration date, right? The date that you're going to start promoting this and really just trying to find tenants out there. This is the beginning date that you're going to launch it, and there has to be an expiration date as well. Okay, so I did it for the sake of today's class. I did a 90-day lease listing agreement. Okay, so March 7th today, and then June 7th of 2025.
Is there a mandatory expiration time? At least for us to, or is no mandatory?
On in regards to the length of a listing.
Good.
Yeah, so the question here is there a link that you like a listing agreement, right, which is 90 days. This one doesn't have that specific language in there. So yeah, so you can definitely do 6 months, 7 months, or even up to a year. The goal is obviously you'll probably get it rented out within a month and a half from the time you put it on the market. Okay. The next is the information on the subject property. Whatever city, you put the city, county, and then the street. I use 123 Banana Street as an example, just to get the humor going. Then the zip code. Then part two goes into the listing terms, okay? What is the seller and you come to an agreement, right? Because no difference than a listing, right? When you go for a listing, you have to do what? Comparables, right? Comps. Find properties that are considerably similar, right? Apples to apples. Well, you can also do comparables when it comes to leases too, right? Depending on the specifics of the property, the amenities, what's going to be included, what's not going to be included. Is it furnished or not furnished, right? So those are elements that you and your client will have to sit down and discuss to ultimately come to a decision of what price to rent this place out, right? If it's a condominium, townhome, a mobile home, or even a business opportunity, and more so a single family residence as well. Okay. So for today's class, I just wanted to keep it very simple. I used 5,500, right? We're using a single family residence here in the city of Torrance as an example, and the sellers or the landlords have agreed to a 5,500 rental. The next is, per, right, is per month. Security deposit, right? What is the security deposit that you're going to put and ask as part of the process, right? This is again where a tenant, right? A tenant is going to want to rent a place, got to go through the screening process, right? Application submission, run their credits, check verification of employments, income, and all that fun stuff to ultimately come to an agreement that they will be the approved applicant on the process of renting out this home. Okay. So the security deposit here is 5,000 as an example. For furnished units, can you charge double the security? Okay, so the answer is it really depends on the circumstances. I want to say you could ask for additional deposit, but I don't know if you can ask for double. So meaning that if you're asking for a deposit of 5,500, can you ask for additional? The answer, I believe, is no, you cannot. It has to be reasonable, right? Because a lot of the stuff is usually the sofas, maybe kitchen appliances. Really depends of exactly. And you may want to also get like an itemized list of stuff, to understand, what is being as part of the agreement, right? So it really depends on the situation and scenario. To be honest with you, I don't think you can charge double the amount of deposit, even though it's a furnished a property. But I can definitely check for you and get more. Just send me an email where I can do a little bit of research on that. Okay.
Which ones are in 1 month, 2 months, or 3 months?
Say again.
One is for 2% or 3 for furnishing. Which one is that? I think they said only 1 month California accepted.
Yeah, that's correct. State of California is very very stickler when it comes to security deposit. So it's only 1 month of security. Yeah, 1 month of security deposit, you know. And that also goes to questions like what about pet and security deposit too as well, right? So yeah, they're just it's so convoluted that it's hard to keep up with the rules and regulations when it comes to landlord rights, tenant rights as well. It's like one day is this, and then tomorrow is a different thing. So it's really, really hard to really track where you're supposed to be in compliance. I try to keep it very neutral for today's session. So it's usually 1 month of security deposit that the landlord can ask the tenant. Okay, good questions. All
But
right,
I,
so
oh,
yes.
sorry, I think it's 2 months if it's furnishized, different than is empty. They add 1 more month if it's furnishized.
I think you're right, but I think there was also a change that
Oh,
transpired with the fires that now
oh,
it's only 1 month. But I can be wrong, okay? Don't quote me on this. I would have to do a little bit of research.
okay. Thank you.
But with the recent fires, I think they did some changes in how landlords and tenants and these applications. But I'll definitely do some research on it for you. All right, so next is the type of tenancy. Is it going to be a month to month? Okay. Or is it going to be a 1 year or other terms, right? It can be more than 1 year, depending on the circumstances and what the landlord wants, and obviously what the tenant wants. Okay. When you see that it says RPO, that's for the landlord. Okay, that's the landlord. So when they talk about the RPO, they're referring to the landlord.
No, I sent her email and I left her message, but I'll
Okay,
follow up.
please make sure to mute.
Okay.
Oh,
But we told her about John.
all right, sorry about that. Let me mute. The beauty of Zoom is the distractions sometimes we get. So I apologize, everyone. All right, let's continue. So items included in the lease rental, all fixed and fitted attached to the premises in the following items of personal property. So here is what is going to be included as part of it. Any personal items staying with the property, right? Again, it can be furniture, it could be televisions, yeah. It can be water filtrations as an example, right? And we're going to touch on that a little bit more. But anything that the owner, landlord will be leaving in the premises, you want to document it so that way you know how to promote this particular lease listing, right, on the MLS. Because that's important too, because that may be a driving force that the tenant may be more intrigued to rent it because it has certain things other than just the house itself. Does that make sense? All right, so that can also be like a portable spa, that you can take it, but the landlords, we're just going to leave it there for the enjoyment of the new tenant in place. Make sense? All right,
So I
so
mean,
we
this
go.
this might be a simple question, but what would you do in case the items don't actually fit on the line? So how would you deal with this?
Yeah, so the beauty of this is, you can put all of this stuff here, right? You can just type, and I'm just typing as an example. What's going to happen, it's going to add a supplement. So regardless of how much you put into this, right, you can just type. What I'll do is at the end, when it's ready for signatures, it will attach the additional supplement to the lease agreement where all of the language that you added to it will be included. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So let me take this jargon back. But again, you can add information. It will always include a supplemental kind of an addendum with all of the additional stuff that is part of the agreement. Section F goes into items included for lease, right? I'm sorry, items excluded from lease, right? What if the garage is excluded, right? They can say, look, we're willing to rent the place, but the detached garage, we're probably not because we still have personal items in there. So that's going to be off, as part of the agreement. All right. And if the tenant is perfectly fine, they know that they have the enjoyment of the house, but they don't have the enjoyment of the garage. And that's okay. That's part of the agreement and it's perfectly legal to do so. Just because you're renting a house a lot and the tenant enjoys the amenities of it, you can put stipulations of what can and cannot be used. In this example here, items excluded from lease or rental could be the garage, could be other things, so whatever the landlord is putting, obviously it has to be reasonable, right? So if it's a hazard or if it's a safety issue, then they cannot restrict it. They have to. Say, for example, they have a basement, right? And if that basement has an electric panel, right? Or if the garage has the main panel, they cannot restrict. In case of an emergency, the tenant has to be allowed to be able to go into the garage to shut something off in case of a fire, right? Or a gas leak, right? Let's just say that the gas line is somewhere where it's restricted because they put a stipulation that that area is restricted from the tenants allowing. Well, that's a safety feature or safety hazard that can compromise, and that's again something that is not going to be able to do.
So you recommend like, obviously, see where we think that.
1,000%, my man. Yeah, absolutely. Remember, a lease listing is kind of going on a listing appointment. Your job is when you go on this appointment, because it is an appointment, you want to know what you're getting into. Yeah. 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 So if it's inside the garage and they're putting a restriction that they cannot use it, then that may be a hazard feature, right? So that is probably something that they cannot allow and do. Only if they give them access to, in case of an emergency, they may say, look, we're still going to restrict from you because we want the garage as part of our personal stuff because we have a lot of personal stuff in there. We'll rent you the place. But in case of an emergency, here's the key, here's the garage door opener that you have access to if you have to. Then that's perfectly fine. But they know that they cannot park their vehicles in there or put in any personal items as storage, as an example. And this is where this statement comes into play. Okay. If there's any additional terms, then you're going to put here if there's any additional stuff that, the landlord is requesting of us to do. Now let's go into the compensation parameter. And again, no difference than, all of the changes that have transpired is there is no compensation to any uh, tenant agent, as an example, right? There's nothing that you can put on the MLS that says that we're going to pay compensation to any cooperating tenant agent that it brings us a qualified tenant, right? So it's kind of similar to the listing agreement that it's only your compensation to you for the services that you're providing to your landlord. This is where you're going to put that information, okay? So section B goes into compensation of broker. Our RPO agrees to pay the broker as compensated for services. As specified below, does not include compensation, if any, to a broker representing a tenant. Okay, so there is a tenant representation agreement. So if the tenant reaches out to you and calls you, hey, I'm calling you about 123 Banana Street in the city of Torrance. They want to submit an application, they can submit the application, but under no circumstances are you representing them if you are not going to have them sign an agreement, okay? Or if they are working with another agent, then they're also going to submit their request for compensation, okay? So here I put that it's 3% of the total rent payment due under the terms specified in paragraph 2C. So I want to make sure we go back to 2C. Then we need to know what this is. If it's a 1 year, then the income is based on the 1 year. So if we do the math here, okay, so what is 5,500 times 12 months? That's $66,000, right? $66,000 from the 5,000 a month. All of the total income that you're generating or the landlord is generating is based on your compensation. So if you are requesting the 3%, then it's 3% of the 66,000. So when you do the math, you do 3%, that means your company, Keller Williams, would get a check for $1,980. Peanuts, right? Wow, but there's also a lot of homes out there that are in the 15, 20,000, $30,000 monthly rental. Okay, so then that increases your compensation as well. Does that make sense? Okay, yeah. So in this case, you're getting a commission for $1,980. Okay, so that's as an example. Now, if it's a month to month, that changes the trajectory of the conversation. It still may be the same. You may be able to still argue the fact that if it's month to month, most likely the tenant will still end up renting it for 12 months. Now, only if it's very specific that it's a short-term rental, then that changes because you can also charge a flat fee. Okay, so you have the ability to do a percentage, or you also have the ability to do a flat fee, meaning I'm going to only charge you, $1,000 as an example for the services to do the paperwork or a percentage of it as well. Does that make sense? Okay. will be the flat fee? It varies, it really varies. I mean, I've seen flat fees of a couple $100. I've seen, flat fees of $100, $75, $50, and I've seen no compensation to any agent as well. So, just be mindful is they may question the compensation because again, they're betting on that the tenant one will remain for the entire year because what happens if they pay you for 1 year lease and then 6 months they leave, but they pay you for a total 1 year, right? They can argue that and say and come back, well, Simon, I paid you for 1 year, but the tenant ended up leaving, after 6 months, right? So it's one of those gambles, right? That if you get a landlord that questions the compensation, they can say, look, I don't mind paying you, but I am not going to pay you if there's no reinsurance that this tenant will even last for 1 year, right? So most of the time, it's always pretty guaranteed, meaning you're not going to see that happening. Most tenants will stay 2 to 3 years or longer in the property. But this is why you have security deposits too, right? If the tenant breaks the lease, as an example, right, after 6 months, the tenant breaks the lease, well, the landlord has some rights, right? They breached the contract, right? Meaning they did not commit to the 1 year. You might be able to one, take some, if not all of the deposit, right? And then go after it. Most landlords will not. Most landlords, it's just too much of a headache. It's time consuming. There's no guarantee that you'll be able to collect the rest of the money. So it's just best to take what you got and then just relist it again and try to find a new qualify tenant. That's my best bet. Okay, but again, the landlord may be in a position that says, look, it may be a high-end property, $20,000-$30,000 monthly fees, and that's a chunk, right? And to re-rent it may be a little tough. So they may have reasons to go after them and take them to small claims for the remainder of the months that they've lost because the tenant breached the contract. Make sense? Okay. All right, well, let's go ahead and continue. Section B, 1, 2, and 3 go into, again, the compensation of what you're going to be charging. The number 2 is for month-to-month rental of 2%. Okay, so this is, again, if let's say that the landlord agrees to pay broker additional compensation, okay? On top of what you're already making here, the 3%, you can put a flat fee here, or you can put other specific terms here. But the landlord agrees to pay additional, meaning any additional on top of what they've already agreed to, then that's where you're going to put that amount. For the month-to-month rental, then obviously that can be the same of 3%, or you can say, look, if it's month-to-month, it's 2%, or it can be, whatever, it may be even a flat fee. Because again, month-to-month, that means as long as the tenant gives a 30-day notice to vacate, the landlord will need to put the property back on the market and try to find another qualified tenant. Okay. All right, section number 3 goes into completing the lease transaction or the landlord default if during the listing period, similar to the listing agreement, right? Extends broker cooperation or any person procuring ready, willing, and able tenant who offers to lease rent the premises on any price and terms is accepted by the landlord, provided the tenant takes possession of the premises under the terms of the lease or rental, or is prevented from doing so by the landlord. Broker is entitled to compensation, whether any tenancy resulting for such offer begins during or after the expiration of the listing. Okay. So here you want to make sure that you do understand that there is a provision of the no fault, right, provision, but also section 3B goes into the continuous right to compensate the broker, similar to what you see on the listing agreement, is you want to make sure that you put a number, okay? I've have this instilled in my head that 120 is the number. 120 is 4 months after the property ends the listing or the cancellation or expiration, we may still be entitled to compensation as long as we do provide certain stipulations, and I'll read it here. So the continuing right to compensate for broker procuring the tenant, if landlord within 120 days after, and this is calendar days, okay? So that includes holidays, that includes weekends, okay? So calendar days, so every single day from the time of the listing or any extension thereafter. So let's say that we do a 3 month listing and then the landlord gives us an additional 3 months, then the stipulation of this 120-day compensation of continuance right will then go on to the additional 3 months after, okay? It doesn't expire from the first one, it continues for the remainder of the additional 3 months. Does that make sense? Okay. So who has physically entered and was shown the property during the listing period or any extensions, it says, therefore, broker or cooperating broker, for whom broker or any cooperating broker submitted to the landlord a signed written offer to lease, rent the premises, however, shall have no obligation to broker under this paragraph 3B unless no later than the end of the listing period or any extension of the cancellation. Broker has given the landlord a written notice of the names of such prospecting clients. Meaning, so what this means, in order to protect yourself from losing an opportunity to collect a commission, is that as soon as you know it's going to expire or cancel, you want to provide a list of anyone that you shown the place, submitted an application. So you want to keep proper documentation in place. So therefore, when the landlord is ready to either cancel, you guys mutually cancel, or the listing for some odd reason did not get leased out and it's about to expire, provide the list to the landlord. So that is your protection, that if anyone on that list comes back in, rents the place, you may be entitled to compensation. Now, with that being said, a lot of questions I get over this is, how do we know, Simon, that it is the tenant? Well, it's going to be very difficult and hard. I'm going to tell you, because one, it's not public information, meaning that when you close on a deal and then go a couple weeks after, you'll see on Realist, right, the taxes, you'll see the new owners, right? And then you can match them to a client of yours or someone that you had as part of the list with the list that the county recorder has, right? Well, in tenancy, there's really not much that you have where you can see. The only avenue is finding out from the landlord or from the agent that may have closed out. So you'll look at the MLS and you'll look at the person that closed it out, because usually, full transparency, right? The listing agent has to identify who is the agent representing the tenant, right? Or if the listing agent was the one that ultimately closed out with the tenant, then it may be something like, hey, I noticed that you closed, congratulations. They may or may not tell you who the tenant is. But for the sake of it, you can say, look, I was the previous listing agent on here. I did provide the landlord with a list. And because you already have that dialogue and communications, right, you may be able to ask the landlord here, I'm just curious, did any of these individuals ended up running the place? Most likely, it's probably not the case. And really, to be quite honest with you, it's not really worth it. Not for tenants, not for the commission that you're going to get, okay? Because again, you can be focusing on bigger fish, in my opinion, okay? I'm just saying, $1,980 is not gonna hurt us, right? It may some, but it's just best to move on, find someone else, right? Go focus on more listings, in my opinion. Okay. All right, so if the landlord interferes with the listing, okay, then it goes into if without broker prior written consent, the premises are withdrawn from lease, rentals or lease rented or otherwise transferred or made unmarketable by the volunteer act of the landlord during the listing period or any extension, meaning that if they interfere with the position of your job to try to secure a qualified tenant for the sake of renting out the place, then you may still be able to go after the landlord for compensation. Okay. All right, that takes us to the second page of the agreement. Now we go into tenant breach and landlord recovery of damage. And it goes as follows. If commencement of the lease or rental is prevented by a party to the transaction other than the landlord, then compensation which otherwise would have been earned under paragraph 3B shall be payable only if and when landlord collects damages by suit, arbitration, settlement, otherwise, then in any amount equal to the lesser of half of the damage recovered or the above compensation. First deduct the expenses of collection, if any, right? So in this situation is, let's just say for the sake of argument, right? You are entitled to compensation, but again, you have a very sophisticated landlord says, look, I want to make sure we're clear on this. I'm willing to pay you, okay? But if it's month to month or even a 1 year lease, they may put stipulation in here saying, look, I'll pay you for the first 6 months, securing that. And then if anything, even though we have a lease agreement in place, right? They may argue and say, look, I'll pay you 6 months, and then I'll pay you the remainder of the 6 months in the near future to make sure that the tenant continues renting and continues paying the rent. They may say like, okay, if they don't stick to their original agreement, the tenant, then the tenant and the landlord will get into basically a recovery where if the landlord wants to go after and sue the tenant, and any damage is collected from the tenant to the landlord, then anything after any expenses that the landlord incur, they may be able to pay you the additional compensation, is what this disclaimer stipulates here. We have a question here. Hey, Simon, can you knock on the door after? Can you knock at the door after the? I don't see why not. I don't see why not. That's a good one. Again, yeah. I mean, I don't think it would hurt, but it's not very common to see that. But that's a good question. All right, let's continue. So, any additional compensation in addition to the landlord agrees to pay? So this is again, you can ask that the landlord say, look, I incur additional costs on top of me marketing your place, okay, promoting it on the MLS. That gets syndicated to third-party sites as well to try to find a ready, willing, and able tenant, and also qualify, because also we got to go through the motions of the application process, right? I still incur additional fees. My fee of 3% is my fee for the services that I perform. The additional fees is my TC. I have a transaction coordinator that handles all of my paperwork to be in compliance. And I also have to pay risk management to protect you and to protect the company and myself. There's an additional fee for risk management. So I'm asking you as the landlord that these are additional costs that you will have to compensate me. So when they write a check, they're going to write a check for your 3%, which was the 1980, plus if your TC is charging you $50 or $100 plus risk management of $65, you want to make sure you incorporate all that and provide the landlord with an invoice breakdown of all of your fees. It's like an invoice. Here you go, landlord, here's my fees. Make sense? All right, collection of compensation. Broker may retain compensation due from any move-in payments made by the tenant to broker pursuant to the lease or rental agreement. Broker is authorized to instruct tenant to deduct the amount of broker compensation from any in payment and make a separate payment to the broker for such amount. Pretty self-explanatory. Compensation of sequential sales of tenants. So this is, again, this is a pretty cool stipulation or verbiage here. All right, because those instances, right, that a tenant will eventually maybe become a owner, meaning that tenant becomes a buyer. So what it says here is that if at any given time during the agreement, right? And again, it's agreed upon between you and the landlord, right? The landlord can says, no, 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 I don't want to. I already have my own agent that I have a strong relationship with who helped me buy this place, and that person will help me sell my place in the future, then you're not going to check this box off. But under those circumstances, you can try to see if it sticks, then put the section F as part of the compensation if the sale to the tenant. So meaning that the landlord sells to the tenant, you may be able to navigate a conversation and ultimately get paid commission for that. So it says that the landlord agrees to pay the broker if the tenant directly or indirectly inquires or enters into an agreement to acquire the title to the property, right? Or any part thereafter, whether by sale, exchange, or otherwise during the term or any extension of the tenancy compensation equal to 2.5% of the selling price or a total consideration in said transfer, which is greater, does not include compensation, if any, to a broker represented tenant. Payment is due upon tenant direct or indirect acquisition of any legal equitable interest in the premises, and if there is an escrow, shall be through escrow. Okay, so it's pretty self-explanatory in my opinion. So just to kind of break it down for you, right? The tenant moves in, something happens that the landlord says, hey, you know what, I'm going to have to sell. Calls the tenant, it says, hey, I want to give you the first right of refusal, meaning I'm going to put the property on the market for sale. Okay, but I also don't want to disrupt you because you just moved into the place 5, 6, 7 months ago. So I want to give you the opportunity to see if you're interested in buying the place. Well, it may be a win, right, for the tenant because one, they don't have to move. They're already living in the place that they're going to buy the place. They're just transitioning from a tenant to a buyer now, right? So if that happens and you get wind of it and you have this check with compensation, then you can now go to the seller and say, hey, we noticed that the property came on the market. It may be on the MLS, maybe not, because again, it may be where they put it on the market just in case the tenant doesn't want to buy the place, or they put it active under contract, right? Because the tenant is buying the place, but they also want to make sure that if the tenant doesn't perform, they have the ability to market it to other potential buyers, right? Then you're entitled to compensation. Yes.
After the lease is up, say after 1 year, the open,
Yeah. So you're saying after the fact?
I mean,
Well,
let's say after 1 year, they said, okay, we intend to sell. You get the 2.5%.
absolutely. You know, again, let's just say theoretically speaking, right? That the tenant, and again, you're going to have to keep track of it. Most agents probably won't, but keeping track of, finding out, checking in with the tenant, checking in with the landlord, right? But maybe 5 years from now, and it happens where the tenant ends up buying the place, that could, usually it doesn't. Usually the tenant will go find another property. They'll give their 30-day notice and says, hey, we're going to go ahead and buy a place. We thank you for allowing us to stay here, but they usually go buy something. But in those circumstances, where the tenant ends up buying the place, it doesn't have an expiration. It could be 10 years from now, and if you can put the puzzle together, you might be able to. I don't know. I don't remember seeing anything that says that there is a expiration to that. But it really depends. Are you going to be really tracking it to see? Usually you don't. Yes, sir. Repeat the question, I'm sorry.
The tenant that wants to rent out the place.
Uh-huh.
It's like, I want to sell like more, so say. Can say they go on the contract, can I just go after them for that, or?
Well, so are you saying before they even rent it, they decide to buy it instead?
For a year or 3 years.
Yeah, so it's both ways. Absolutely, yeah, both ways. So the question is, he's saying that if it's not the if it's not the landlord asking that they're going to sell the place, and if they're wanting to give it to the tenant, the question he's asking, and I think I'm hearing what you're saying, is that the tenant is asking the seller or the landlord if they're willing to sell the place to them. The answer is yeah, absolutely, because it talks about both. You have an agreement here that has the name of the owner, and also you're going to have the buyer or the tenant in here as well. So it ties it together. So to answer your question, yes, you should be able to be entitled to compensation. Okay. Say again, this is a new one? Yes, this is the new, this is a lease listing, okay? This is not a lease agreement. This is, let me go back, lease listing. This is for you when you're listing the property, okay? So don't get both of them confused, because I tell you, it's like, wait a minute, this is not the lease agreement. This is when you're trying to lease out on behalf of the client as the agent to put it on the multiple listing service. This is not a lease agreement. That's a different conversation. Yeah. But I like it because it has a lot of good information and good nuggets in there. Can a listing agent charge extra for a tenant screening process? So yes, they can. So part of like rent spree allows the tenant to go directly, and is part of your local association. If you're a member of the California Association of Realtors, you know that that's part of your member service, meaning that you can create your profile, and now you can submit the link to the tenant, or you can pay on behalf of the tenant and collect the money after if you want to go in that direction. Meaning you can pay uh, the screening fee and then charge the landlord directly as part of the compensation, right? But most agents, what they'll do is they'll send the link to the agent will send it over to the tenant, and then the tenant will see the link. They will go in there, put on all their personal information, and there's a link there that will charge a debit card, credit card information, and the system does it for you. You get the report, and it'll break it down if they're a good candidate or not, and it'll give you suggestions as well, but it does a screening of the credit, a screening of background, and any evictions. Okay. And then the system will say, yeah, this is a green light tenant. They're solid. You should consider, or there may be some issues. And what I like about Rent Spree, it also gives you suggestions and how to navigate a decline applicant due to, stuff that was on the credit. Okay. All right, you're saying I meant, can the listing agent assist and charge extra for actual due diligence of screening the tenant? Oh, okay, meaning that you're doing additional. Call the employer, previous landlord. No. So whatever you're gonna put, Ellen, on the listing agreement as compensation, the only avenue that you can charge additional is if you put a disclaimer on the agreement. But most likely, I don't know if you can do, and I'm assuming you're saying that the tenant pays you, or the landlord pays you. Let me make sure.
Let me interject. Thank you, Simon, for taking the call. You know, like some of my clients are investors. They don't have time to do the legwork, so to speak. So between Lexpree and the listing agent,
Yes.
they say, hey, I don't mind paying you extra for your time. You know, you do the due diligence as far as just contact employer, landlord, etc., and just give me that information, and then I'll make a decision along with the rent spree and
Right.
your feedback. But that takes time and it takes skill. And so my
Right.
question is, can you charge for your time or additional fee just for doing that additional work?
Right. You know, that's a very good question, and this is the first time I hear this. I'm going to do some research on that. I'm not 100% sure if we can charge additional for, basically legwork, right? Going out, pre-screening, and doing this on behalf of your client, right? Because again, our job is just to facilitate to find a tenant and then let the landlord make an ultimate decision. The landlord is the responsible party because they're the ones that are going to hand over the keys to the tenant. They're the ones that are going to collect the rent. They're the ones that have to deal if the tenant doesn't pay rent or there's issues, right? It's the tenant. So when it comes to these type of situations, I want to make sure that I'm crystal clear and to protect you from doing anything other than could compromise, because with tenant rights right now, it is so sensitive, it's so volatile, and if the tenant feels that they've been, what's the word, not necessarily taken advantage, but they feel
Discriminated?
they may feel discriminated, or they feel like you're intruding in much that you shouldn't, then that can compromise them from going after us for, a potential claim. I'm just saying, especially with everything that's going on. So if anything, I'd rather have the landlord do all of the legwork and make sure that they are good to go, because they got to give us the green light and says, yes, I'm okay with letting Mr. and Mrs. Batman, as an example, rent the place because they've already done their due diligence in regarding the screening, right? We provide a certain layer of information, which is the application, the lease agreements, the listing agreements, the disclosures, and ultimately the report that we do as part of rent spree, right? That will give us a very thorough analysis of a specific tenant, right? And remember, if if you're gonna be including a tenant, right? It has to be all applicants that are 18 years or older, meaning that if it's a husband and a wife and maybe two adult children that are living in a place, guess what? You need to run checks on all four. Okay, not just the parents, not just one. You got to run all four as part of the process. Okay, so I want to be clear on that. Now, going back to the question, which is a good question, is, because yeah, it can be time consuming, right? Picking up the phone, verification of employment, verification of, referral, not references, I should say, checking in with past tenants, or excuse me, past landlords. Again, typically it's not the agent's responsibility to do so, it's the landlord, right? The landlord needs to be doing all of that stuff. Now, if the landlord says, look, I want you to facilitate that, and you're okay doing that, and want to be compensated additionally, you want to make sure you put that on the listing agreement. But remember, just for the sake of protection, be very careful of what you're doing, because too deep into a analysis, I guess, of the parameter in here to screen someone may compromise either going a little too much into it. So again, I rather delegate it and have the landlord, make that decision and have them handle it themselves instead. I hope that kind of answers your question. All right, so like call the employer's previous landlords. Yeah. Absolutely, just assist in the process of gathering the information on behalf of the landlord makes the decision. Yeah, 100%, 100%. All right, so let's continue. We'll go to the next one. We talked about this, compensation obligations to others. So let's just say, for example, that the landlord was working with another agent. It expires, and they says, "Look, I'll give you the opportunity to list the place, but under these circumstances, these terms," meaning that if any of the previous persons or person comes, then I'm not going to pay you compensation. So let's just say that we're back and forth and something happened and the tenant that was previously going to rent says, look, I have to leave. I had a death in the in the family, I have to go out of the country and I'll be gone, for about a month, right? And let's say that the listing also is about to expire, right? Well, the landlord can put a stipulation says that warrants that the landlord has no obligation to pay compensation to any other broker, lease or rental of a premise unless the premises are leased or rented to, right? So that's where you're going to put that information, right? Maybe the previous agent had a list that they provided, right? And that list has, maybe 15 different applicants. So to protect the landlord from paying double commission, they're going to say, look, Simon, I'm willing to give you the listing, but here's the terms. If any of these come back and I end up renting them out to these individuals, then I'm not entitled to pay you compensation, which is perfectly fine. Yes.
This would be okay for, leases?
Commercial leases, yeah, absolutely. But commercial is a different animal too. A lot different than, yeah. Yeah, it's similar, but there's also different language that we talk about when it comes to commercial, and I'll probably have a class on that as well. All right, compensation obligation to tenant broker. Many tenants do not have sufficient funds to pay the landlord or security deposit in first month's rent and also pay their own broker compensation. So the landlord may be request to include a term in the lease or rental agreement agreeing to pay the tenant broker for services rendered in the tenant entering into, if applicable, renewing or leasing a rental. So pretty self-explanatory, right? Number 4 goes into tenant payments. All right, so the followings are due. This is kind of a breakdown, payable to the landlord unless otherwise specified. So here, this is how you structure how the compensation is going to be. Number 1 goes first month's rent paid to broker, okay, at execution upon possession or other. Security deposit to be paid to broker, due at execution upon possession or other. Or 3 or 4 others, right? To broker when due, right? Typically, depending on the circumstances, here's my thought around this. And this is just my suggestion. Many agents do it a little different. I'm not really heavily into the leases. I focus more on the process of buying, selling, and listings than tenant um, leasing and applications and so on and so forth. My best way of looking at this is 1, have the tenant, right? Have the tenant pay the entire first, last, and security deposit to the landlord. Okay. The landlord, because we have an employment with the landlord, right? The landlord then writes a check to us for our compensation. The check will be made out to Keller Williams. That is probably the best and the cleanest way instead of having multiple checks. Depending on the landlord may be okay and says, look, we're going to break it down this way, right? Meaning that the tenant will make a check to the landlord and then the tenant will make an additional check to us because it's part of the first, the last, and the security deposit. So from there, we may get our compensation. And if that's the arrangement that the landlord wants, then we give that information to the agent representing the tenant, or as if we're representing the tenant, we give that information to the tenant. You're going to break 2 checks, one for the landlord and one for KW. Okay, so that should equal the same, right? So let's say it's a $10,000 security deposit first and last, right? As an example. And then your compensation is 2,000. So the tenant will write a check for 8,000 to the landlord as an example, and then 2,000 to KW. Does that make sense? Okay, that still is the obligation that the tenant has the obligation to the landlord, but the landlord is specifically asking us to break it down that way. Does that make sense? Okay. Yes. Okay, so let's say that the first and last month in security deposit, it equals $10,000, right? That is the check that the tenant will be sending to the landlord. to rent their place, right? But the landlord says, look, I just want my percentage and I want the tenant to pay you the percentage that I'm obligated to pay you. So then you're gonna talk to the agent and you're gonna tell the agent to tell their tenants that we need two checks.
Yeah.
One check to the landlord and then one check to Keller Williams. So when the landlord is preparing to do the check for $10,000, let's say out of that 10,000, 2,000 is your compensation, then you're gonna have the agent tell the tenant to do a check for $8,000 and $2,000 for Keller Williams.
If you do it that way, the tenant know how much you are paid. Instead, actually what you did, just.
I get it. That's why I'm saying the cleanest way is have the tenant just write one check to the landlord and then the landlord pays us and go in that way. The other flip side to that is what if there's two agents, two compensations, right? Well, again, that's the same component, right? If we're gonna pay two commissions, right, one for the buyer's tenant and one for you as the listing agent, the two circumstances here, and again, the tenant is gonna make the check out to the owner, and then the owner will write two checks, one to KW and one to another KW office as an example. Okay, that's the cleanest way. The other way is that the tenant will then write three checks, right? One check to the owner, one check to us, and the check to the agent that helped them facilitate the rent, okay? But then again, yes, of course, they're gonna know, but if they have a buyer representation agreement, they know that they're already gonna pay X amount of money to the agent. I understand you had a different situation, which was different, exactly. Okay. All right, so let me see what other questions we have. All right, so Dino's is saying under 3G unrepresented buyer. Okay, so yeah, we're gonna talk a little bit on that. Buyer accepting to also charge the buyer for representing them. I believe you can via the tenant representation broker compensation agreement. And is it still allowed to collect first, last, and secure deposit for 1 to 2 units? 1 minute. Why is this? Here we go. Is it still allowed to collect first, last, and secured deposit for 1 to 4 units? Yes.
We already asked that, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Got it. Okay. So your question, Dinos, is about the unrepresented?
Yes, yeah, I know we got a little bit, fell behind a little bit, but yeah, I was just wondering if, because I've had, RPOs that said, well, I'm not going to pay for him, if he's unrepresented, that's his problem. So I just ended up doing it for free. It's really not that big of a deal, but I'm just curious if under that tenant representation agreement, can we charge there? Let's say if it's something like, $500 or whatever.
Correct.
Just to hold their hand and make sure that they get taken care of.
Right. So here under G3, additional compensation due to broker if tenant is unrepresented. So that means that you're the listing agent, right? You're listing this place for rental. And someone comes in or calls you, says, hey, I'm not working with an agent, but I would like to submit an application. Great, not a problem. You can either do one or two things. One, you can ask to be as part of the process to represent this tenant, then you'll do a representation agreement, right? The tenant representation
Right.
agreement. Second, if you don't want to, and you can just do the additional paperwork, then you can say to the seller, or excuse me, the landlord saying, look, I'm not going to represent the tenant, but I will do the extra efforts and paperwork and navigate to ultimately find a qualified tenant for you. I'm going to ask to be charge you additional fees for that. And there you can put a percentage or a flat fee. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. All right. So sorry about that. All right. Then the next is the tenant payments we talked about. Direct, that's it. If the tenant and the landlord want direct deposit, then they can facilitate that. If checked, then the landlord is authorizing the use of a key safe lockbox. and also a for sale, excuse me, a rental sign as well. So if they do want, they need to check it. If they don't want, then you leave it blank, unchecked. Section 7 goes into, again, the multiple listing service, that it will or will not be promoted on the MLS. Most times it is, so you want to make sure you uncheck it. Security insurance, broker is not responsible for loss or damage, or there's a disclaimer on there. Ownership, title, or authority. The landlord warns that the landlord is the legal owner or landlord of the premise. No other persons or entities have titles. So if there is anyone, then you would add that information as well here. The landlord representation, landlord represent that unless otherwise specified in writing that the landlord is unaware of any recorded deeds. So basically that there is any issues, litigations, arbitrations pending. If there is, they need to divulge and disclose that, because that may jeopardize the process and the tenant of having a place because of litigation happening. 11 goes into the California withholdings and then the federal holdings when it comes to corporations. If you're a non-foreigner, right, there's additional work involving, sometimes you got international business people, right? Like a lot of it is like sports and entertainment. People from all over the world come to play sports for us here in the US, but they're not US citizens. They're here on a visa because they're here to work. Entertainers, even like I've seen pilots too. Pilots that are from other parts of the world come in and need a place to rent because they work for, let's say, Delta, but they're from, say, Japan, as an example. The company Delta will vet for them and verify and ultimately give you all of that they're employed by them. This is what they get paid. So it's not like you necessarily could run a credit check on them because they don't have a social security. So there's other means in how you can approach it. And Dinos, I know you've been in that circumstance too as well.
Yeah, I had a professional soccer player from Norway.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, very cool. I hope you got his autograph at least.
Oh, I'm getting tickets as soon as his leg heals up.
I love that. All right, number 12 just basically goes into the broker's responsibilities and the duties between you as the broker and the landlord, right? The authority and limitations, disclosures, right? Part of the process is disclosures that are be provided. Good faith agrees to consider offers presented by broker and act in good faith to accomplish the lease. Again, identify also that the landlord agrees to identify, defend, and hold harmless the broker. So there's protections there that if they want to come after us, they've initial and signed this agreement that they won't as part of the process. 13 goes into the agency relationship, disclosures, landlord representation. Broker shall represent landlord in any resulting transaction except as specified under paragraph 3H. Possible dual agency with tenant, right? You may be in a position that you have multiple tenants. You, as a listing agent, that you may have multiple tenants that you're submitting applications on behalf to the landlord, right? So it's just, again, full transparency and full disclosure. Landlord understands the broker may have or obtain listings on the properties and that the potential tenants may consider making offers on or lease or rental, and confirmation if the premise includes residential property with 1 of 4 dwelling units and the agreed upon lease is for a tenancy in excess of 1 year, broker shall confirm the agency relation described above or as modified and written prior to or coincidence with the landlord and tenant execution of this lease. Termination of agency relationship. Again, if there is any issues with you severing the relationship with the landlord, you know, there's proper channels in how to utilize it, similar to a cancellation of listing. You also will have the cancellation of the lease agreement in place, lease listing in place. The other stuff is pretty self-explanatory. Attorney fees, dispute, or resolution. We will always try to do mediation before we escalate it to a potential arbitration. But, you know, full disclaimer is they cannot just immediately try to sue us. Let's try to mediate this and come to a solution. Advisories, basically there is a form, the ARB form. that it is included is if there is an arbitration that needs to between agents, landlord, or even possible tenant, we will go through the arbitration process. All these documents must be approved. That a salesperson or broker entering into agreement, broker's behalf, broker manager has the right to cancel the agreement within 5 calendar days after the execution. Basically, this is why we have compliance. And compliance goes that, if there's anything that looks a little strange, that will bring it up to our attention. And if I see that there's something that may be a potential liability, potential lawsuit or discriminatorial here, then I have the right to cancel the agreement under the company. Everything is all about equal housing opportunities, additional terms. A success and assigns the agreement shall be binding with the landlord and successors and assignees. Basically, if there is more than one party and there's a trust, or a corporation, that everyone has to understand and know that it has to be an executed agreement, and we need to have everyone involved in it, signing off on these terms. Legal authorization signers, who are the people that are obligated to sign the agreement. And then the last part of it here is that if it is a entity rental property owner, then if it's a corporation, LLC, any of these, then you're just going to put the information of who is the authorized person on behalf of the S Corp, C Corp, LLC, or trust. Okay, you or the owner can sign. The legal authorized signer will go here, and then all of the information there. Okay. With that being said, that's pretty much it with the lease listing agreement. Any questions that you have regarding this? I know it's a lot, and as confusing as it is, the more you read it, the more you understand. And there's a lot of great resources through the California Association of Realtors. They have a section on just leases. There's a lot of great stuff on YouTube as well that I've seen other instructors, brokers, and managers give conversations regarding the lease. And again, you can always reach out to me, and I'll be more than happy to also answer and navigate that. With that, that is it. I appreciate you all on Zoom. Thank you very much for being on the call. Have a great afternoon and an enjoyable weekend. And again, thank you for everything, guys. Take care.
All right. Thanks, Simon.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Simon.